I never thought my own brother would walk into my grease-stained workshop and demand I sign away our father's legacy like he was a debt collector, instead of the boy I protected from bullies 60 years ago. It was a freezing Thursday afternoon. I was wiping down the gears of a lathe when the heavy iron door rattled open. My younger brother Julian walked in, shaking the rainwater from his tailored coat without waiting for an invite. Julian looked frantic. He didn't even care about the grime on the stools. He stood there, his leather shoes sinking into the sawdust, and said sharply, "Silas, I need your signature on the workshop deed today. Investors are waiting." The desperate greed in his eyes made it very clear. This wasn't a family visit, it was an ambush. I looked at him through the steam of my coffee cup for a long moment, then nodded slowly and said, "Leave the papers on the workbench. No arguments." Julian looked shocked but flashed an arrogant grin. He walked out into the rain, thinking he had finally broken me. Hey everyone, welcome to Revenge Blueprint. If you love real family stories filled with secrets, betrayal, hidden truths, and quiet justice, hit that subscribe button right now and turn on notifications. Stick with me. I had been quietly preparing for his arrival for weeks, knowing his debts were catching up to him. While he was driving back to his fancy city apartment, celebrating his easy win, I was already dialing my attorney to tighten the lock on the family trust. Julian thought he was about to cash in on my life's work. He had no idea he was walking straight into the coldest lesson of his life. I wasn't going to shout or fight. I was going to let the iron teeth of the law crush his greed without saying a single word. The rain in Pennsylvania during late October doesn't just fall. It drills into the earth like old nails. Inside the workshop, the air belonged to oil, cold iron, and the sharp, burnt smell of welding arcs. I am Silas Vance. At 70 years old, my knuckles are twice the size they should be, swollen from 50 winters of gripping wrenches and swinging hammers. My spine doesn't bend easily anymore, but it holds. My father built this place in 1952 with salvaged bricks from an old foundry. Every machine in here, from the heavy-duty milling press to the small lathe, has a specific hum. I know when a bearing is dry just by the vibration through the concrete floor. Julian didn't know the hum. He never did. When he pushed the iron door open that Thursday, the wind howled behind him, spraying gray water across the clean workbench. He didn't look like a man who spent his life in the dirt. He wore a camel hair coat that cost more than my first truck, and his silver hair was slicked back with expensive grease. But I noticed his shoes first. Expensive Italian leather, but the heels were ground down to the plastic core. A man who has money fixes his shoes. A man who pretends to have money just hopes nobody looks down. "Silas," he said, his voice bouncing off the metal rafters. He didn't come close to shake my hand. The grease on my coveralls was an invisible wall to him. Good God, it's still a tomb in here. How do you breathe this stuff? I didn't stop my work. I kept using the steel wool to clean the rust off a tractor sprocket. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The sound was regular, heavy. "The door is behind you, Julian. Close it before the moisture ruins the steel." He scoffed, kicking the door shut with his heel. He walked over to the small kerosene heater in the corner, rubbing his soft hands together. 10 years, Silas. 10 years of silence. And that's all I get? No hello, brother. No how's the city. You didn't drive 3 hours through a storm to ask about my health, I said. My voice was low, flat, the same tone I used when telling a customer their engine block was cracked beyond repair. Speak plain. Julian straightened his coat, his chest puffing out with that old familiar arrogance he used when selling swampland to retirees. He pulled a thick leather folder from his inside pocket. He didn't set it on the workbench. He held it like a shield. "The county is rezoning the industrial strip, Silas. A commercial developer wants the block. They're putting in a logistics hub. This old brick box of yours? It's right in the middle of the access road." He stepped closer, his breath smelling of mints and cheap whiskey. "They're offering $700,000 for the dirt alone. But the deed needs both signatures because of Dad's old clause. I already signed my half at the notary this morning. I need yours." Now. I stopped scraping. The steel wool felt heavy in my palm. I looked at the old gauge on the pillar. The needle had been stuck at 0 for 30 years. A tiny crack split right across the glass face. My father died holding the handle of the main power switch in this very room. He didn't leave us money. He left us an anchor. "Marcus needs this shop," I said softly, looking toward the dark back room where my son was quiet, sorting bolts. "His leg doesn't let him construction work anymore. The tools keep him fed." Julian laughed, a short, ugly sound that snapped like a dry twig. "Marcus can open a shop anywhere, Silas." With 350 grand in your pocket, you can buy him a metal shed out in the county. Don't be stubborn. The papers are inside. Sign it, and we both walk away clean. He laid the folder on the edge of the grease-covered desk, sliding a heavy silver pen beside it. He thought because I was old, my mind moved at the speed of my joints. He thought the sheer volume of the money would blind a man who made his living $20 at a time. I looked at the signature line, Silas Vance. Next to it was Julian Vance, written in big, loopy, theatrical letters. Leave it, I said, not looking up at him. I need to read the fine print. There's nothing to read, Julian said, his voice rising, a sharp edge of panic cutting through his smooth delivery. The developers have a hard deadline, Silas, Friday, noon. If the signed deed isn't on their desk, they bypass, we get nothing. The city condemns the building anyway for the highway expansion. You want to lose everything for pride? I picked up the silver pen. It felt too light, like a toy. Julian's eyes tracked the movement of my thumb, his chest rising and falling quickly. He was holding his breath. I could see a bead of sweat breaking through the grease near his sideburn, despite the chill in the room. I didn't sign. I dropped the pen back onto the leather folder with a dull click. I'll think on it, I said. Go get some dinner at the diner down the road. Come back at 8 tomorrow morning. Julian stared at me, his teeth gritting so hard the muscle in his jaw twitched. For a second, I thought he was going to reach across the desk and grab my collar. But he looked at my arms still thick from 40 years of ironwork and stepped back. 8 o'clock, Silas, he spat, his face flushing a dangerous dark red. Don't ruin the only good thing our father ever did for us. He slammed the door when he left. The rattle didn't stop for 5 seconds. Marcus came out of the back room 5 minutes later. He limped heavily, his right orthotic brace clicking against the floorboards. In his hand, he held a rusted half-inch iron nut. He didn't look at the folder on the desk. He didn't have to. He had heard every word through the thin plywood partition. He's lying, Dad, Marcus said. His voice was rough, like gravel turning in a cement mixer. I know, I replied. The county isn't rezoning for another 2 years. I checked the ledger at the town hall last month when we applied for the new sign permit. Marcus dropped the rusted nut onto the table. It rolled and hit the leather folder. Julian's name was on the sheriff's list in the local paper last Tuesday. Foreclosure notice on his city townhome. He doesn't want to buy me a shed. He wants to keep the bank from taking his car. I sat down on the old wooden stool, my knees barking at the weather. I picked up the heavy 4-pound steel hammer my father had forged with his own hands. The leather wrap on the handle was dark, molded to the shape of an old man's grip. I held it against my thigh. Your uncle always thought the world owed him a living because he could talk without stuttering, I said. He forgets that words don't support a roof. Timber does. Steel does. What are you going to do? Marcus asked. He looked at the folder with a quiet, dangerous anger. He had worked this shop with me since he was 12. His blood was in the floor mortar just as much as mine. Get the truck keys, son, I said, standing up. We're going to see Clara at the title office. If Julian wants to use our father's name as a lever, he's going to find out how hard the foundation is. The drive into town was silent. The wipers on the old F-150 groaned against the heavy downpour, clearing away slices of the dark, sodden valley. I didn't feel angry. When you work with machines, anger is a useless emotion. If a gear strips, you don't curse the iron. You find out why the oil failed, and you replace the part. Julian was a faulty gear. He had been slipping for 40 years, teeth grinding down until there was nothing left but smooth, useless metal. Clara was 65, her eyes hidden behind thick tortoise-shell glasses, sitting in the basement archives of the county building. She had known my father. She had registered the original deed for this shop back when the town was nothing but coal, smoke, and hope. She laid the yellowed ledger on the counter between us. The paper smelled like old dirt and damp stone. Silas, she said, her finger tracing the faded ink of my father's handwriting from 1974. Your dad was smarter than he let on. When he added the survival clause after your mother passed, he didn't just split the property 50-50. He put in a non-severability rider. Explain it for a shop hand, Clara, I said. It means neither of you can sell your share to a third party without giving the other brother 90 days right of first refusal at the original tax assessment value from 30 years ago, she said, looking up over her lenses. And if either brother files for personal bankruptcy before a sale, his portion automatically reverts to the primary occupier of the business to prevent court-ordered liquidation of the tools. I looked down at the paper. My father's signature was small, precise, the script of a man who didn't like wasting ink. He had seen Julian's nature even back then. He knew one son would build and the other would scavenge. He had placed a hidden weld inside the contract, waiting for Julian to pull too hard so it would snap his wrist. "Can you print a certified copy of the writer, Clara?" Marcus asked from behind me. "Already doing it, boy," she said, her old typewriter starting to clack against the silence of the basement. "Your Uncle Julian was here 3 weeks ago, asking if the old ledger could be lost. I told him the county doesn't lose iron records. He didn't like that. I didn't say anything. I just watched the white paper roll out of the machine. The truth doesn't need to be loud to be heavy. It just needs to be official." Friday morning arrived without the sun. The rain had turned into a thick, low-crawling fog that smelled of wet slate and old leaves. I opened the shop at 7. By 7:30, the old cast-iron wood stove was roaring, casting long orange shadows across the grease-slick floor. At exactly 7:55, a black luxury sedan pulled up to the gravel gate. The engine didn't sound like a truck. It purred like a well-fed cat. Julian stepped out, his collar turned up against the mist. He wasn't alone. 2 men followed him. One was young, wearing an oversized blue suit and carrying a leather briefcase with gold latches. The other was older, thicker, with a face like an old boot and an oilskin jacket that didn't belong in a city. I recognized the thick man. That was Vance Gator Miller, a local private lender who ran a scrapyard 3 towns over. A man you called when the banks told you to go to hell. Julian pushed the workshop door open, stepping inside with a false booming laugh. "Silas, look at this, right on time. I brought the notary, Mr. Davis, here to make it official. And Gator came along just to see the old place. You remember Gator, right?" Gator didn't smile. He stood by the door, his hands jammed into his coat pockets, his eyes scanning the machinery, estimating the scrap value of the lathe and the press. He was here to collect a carcass. He didn't care who killed it. "Julian," I said, not moving from behind my workbench. Marcus stood 3 feet to my right, his hands resting flat on the cold steel of the welding table. "You brought a lot of weight for a simple signature." "Business, Silas. Time is money," Julian said, his voice bouncing too fast against the metal walls. He knocked some dust off the edge of the desk and nodded to the young man with the briefcase. "Set it up, Davis. Let's get my brother's mark on the title transfer so we can all get out of this drafty barn." The young notary opened his case, his hands trembling slightly in the chill. He laid 3 copies of the deed transfer on the desk, right next to my father's old 4-pound hammer. "Sign right at the yellow tabs, Mr. Vance," the notary said, his voice thin. I didn't pick up the pen. I reached into my coverall pocket and pulled out the certified copy from the county archive. I didn't hand it to Julian. I laid it flat on top of his new white papers. "What's this?" Julian asked, his smile faltering, the edges of his mouth dropping a fraction of an inch. "That's our father's voice from 1974, I said. "Marcus, read the underline." Marcus didn't hesitate. His voice was loud, steady, filling the entire room like an iron bar falling on concrete. Section 4, Paragraph 2. In the event of proposed liquidation or third-party transfer, the non-severability rider requires a 90-day written notice to the resident partner. The acquisition price shall be fixed at the $1,985 county valuation, $12,000 total for the half share. The room went completely silent except for the crackle of the pine wood inside the stove. Julian's face went from pale to a greasy white. He snatched the paper, his eyes darting across the ink like a trapped animal looking for a hole in the wire. "This is old garbage. It's outdated. The new deed replaces this." "The new deed hasn't been signed, Julian," I said, my voice dropping an octave, becoming as heavy as the anvil in the corner. "And it won't be. I'm exercising my 90-day right of first refusal. I'll buy your half. For $12,000. I have the cashier's check right here." I pulled a small slip of blue paper from my ledger book and set it on the table. $12,000. A pittance compared to a $700,000 lie. Gator Miller moved then. He stepped away from the door, his heavy boots grunting against the sawdust. He walked right up to Julian, ignoring me completely. He grabbed the yellow archive paper out of Julian's hands, his rough eyes reading the text in 3 seconds. "You told me the deed was clean, Vance," Gator said. His voice was a low growl, the sound of iron dragging on dirt. "You told me the old man had no legal defense." "Gator, wait," Julian stammered, his hands going out, his palms sweating. "My brother is just bluffing. We can contest this in the city court. It'll take a year. The developers will wait." "The developers don't wait for title fights," Gator said, his face inches from Julian's. He reached out and tapped Julian's chest with two thick fingers, hard enough to make the smaller man step back. You owe me $85,000 by Tuesday noon, Julian. I don't care about this shop. I don't care about your brother. I want my money, or I'm taking the keys to your townhouse and the registration for that black boat outside. Gator, please. Julian's voice cracked. The charm was gone. The slick city broker was gone. He looked like an old, wet dog shivering in a ditch. The notary didn't wait. He packed his silver pen in his leather briefcase within 10 seconds, pulled his collar up, and slipped out the iron door without saying a single word to anyone. He didn't want to be a witness to what came next. Gator looked at me for a long second. He didn't say anything, but he gave a small, respectful nod toward the 4-pound hammer on the desk. He knew what a work hand looked like. He knew he had been lied to by a thief. See you Tuesday, Julian, Gator said softly. He walked out, leaving the iron door wide open. The cold fog rolled in immediately, covering the floorboards with a thin white sheen. Julian stood there alone. His coat looked too big for him now, the camel hair shoulders slumping. He looked at the blue cashier's check on the workbench, then at me. His eyes weren't frantic anymore. They were empty, dead. $12,000? He whispered, his lips blue. That won't even pay the interest on Gator's note, Silas. They're going to take everything I have. I'll be on the street. I'm 62 years old. You should have thought about the street before you tried to steal the roof from under your nephew's feet, I said. Julian took a step toward the workbench, his hands curling into loose fists. You always hated me. Ever since we were boys, Dad gave you the shop because you were the dull one who couldn't do anything else but swing a hammer. I was supposed to be something big, and you're sitting here in this grease, destroying my life out of spite. Marcus took a step forward, his leg brace creaking, but I raised my left hand. Marcus stopped. I stood up from my stool. My joints popped like small firecrackers in the quiet room. I walked around the desk until I was standing 2 feet from my brother. He smelled of fear now, raw and sour. Dad didn't give me the shop because I was dull, Julian, I said, my voice steady, not a ripple of anger in it. He gave it to me because when the foundation cracked in '76, I stayed up 3 nights in the mud jacking up the sills while you were in the city drinking gin with lawyers. He gave it to me because iron doesn't care about your speeches. It only respects the heat and the weight. I picked up the $12,000 check and held it out to him. Take the money, I said. Sign the reversal document, Clara printed. It's enough to keep Gator from breaking your shins. But you don't come back down this valley, Julian. Not for a funeral. Not for a handout. Julian looked at the check. His hand shook so badly, he dropped it twice before he could slide it into his pocket. He didn't look at my face again. He reached down, picked up a cheap plastic pen from the desk, and scribbled his name on the county archive form, relinquishing his rights to the Vance & Sons workshop forever. He left without his coat thong tightened. He didn't look back at the brick box or the access road. The black sedan roared to life, its tires spinning on the wet gravel, throwing gray mud against the old wooden fence before disappearing into the mountain fog. The workshop went completely quiet again. The only sound left was the regular heavy thump of the wood stove clearing its throat. Marcus walked over to the door and pulled it shut, sliding the heavy iron bolt into the frame. The latch clicked home with a finality that sounded like a rifle shot. He won't come back, Dad, Marcus said, looking at the floor. No, I said. I walked back to my lathe. I picked up the steel wool. My hand was steady, but inside, my chest felt hollow, like an old iron boiler that had been drained for the winter. Julian was my brother. I had carried him across the creek when his boots leaked in '64. I had lied to our mother when he stole the apples from the orchard. But a house with a rotten sill cannot be saved. You either cut the wood out, or you let the whole structure drop into the dirt. Let's get back to work, son, I said. That tractor sprocket won't clean itself. Scrape, scrape, scrape. The hum of the shop returned, regular and cold. The legacy was safe. The brick box was ours. But as I looked at the old gauge on the wall, with its cracked glass and its needle pointing to nothing, I knew that some victories don't leave you feeling like a winner. They just leave you standing in the dark, holding the hammer your father left you, waiting for the rain to stop. You see, a lot of people watch these stories and they want a loud explosion. They want the bad guy to go to jail, or they want the old man to laugh while he counts his money. But that's not how the world works when you've lived 70 years on this earth. Real justice isn't a celebration. It's a chore. It's like fixing a broken fence line in the middle of a blizzard. Your hands freeze, your back aches, and when you're done, all you have is a fence that does what it was always supposed to do in the first place. You haven't gained anything new. You've just kept the wolves out. I look at my brother Julian, and I don't feel hatred. I feel the same pity I feel for a machine that was built with cheap metal from the start, a machine that was always going to fail under pressure because it wasn't tempered right in the forge. He spent his whole life trying to find a shortcut around hard work, and in the end, the shortcut led him right off the edge of a cliff. But don't get me wrong, I don't regret saying no. A man who doesn't protect his descent, his legacy from the people who didn't sweat for it, isn't a good man. He's a weak man. Kindness without boundaries isn't love. It's just cowardice dressed up in a Sunday suit. My father poured his life into these bricks. Marcus gave his right leg to keep these machines turning. If I had let Julian sell this dirt to some city developer just to save him from his own bad choices, I would have been spitting on 2 generations of honest sweat. So I ask you this. As you sit there in your quiet room, if someone in your own bloodline came to you with a smile on their face but a crowbar behind their back, would you have the steel in your spine to lock the door? Or would you let them take your children's future just because you're afraid of a little noise? The check was cashed 3 days later in a branch office in Philadelphia. I know because the bank statement sent a short notification to my phone. That was the last piece of Julian Vance that will ever touch this valley. The winter is coming fast now. The fog has turned into morning frost, whitening the gray bricks of the workshop every dawn. Marcus works the morning shift now, his brace clicking regular against the concrete. He's getting faster with the lathe. He doesn't ask about his uncle, and I don't bring the name into the room. Some names carry too much rust. Yesterday, Marcus brought his own boy, little Silas, to the shop after school. The boy is only 7, with hair the color of copper wire and hands that can't even close around a half-inch wrench yet. But he sat on the woodpile by the stove, watching his father trim a steel shaft with a proud, wide smile on his face. I stood on the porch of the office, looking at them through the dirty window glass. The old gauge was still there on the pillar, cracked and still. But the room was warm. The hum was right. Real power isn't loud. It is calm, wise, patient, and prepared. I didn't ask him if he regretted it. I asked him if he could sleep.